Hello, all of my history-loving friends. This is Madam Morbid. I am your guide on any number of historical adventures. Today is part 4 of the life of Lee Harvey Oswald. I encourage you to start at the first episode. On today's episode, we are going to talk about his attempt on the life of General Edwin Walker. If you will remember, the family was living at 214 Neely Street. Oswald had changed his mind about trying to kill Walker at close range. During the month of March, Walker is gone. He left in the end of February, going on this Operation Midnight Ride. The communists are coming, the communists are coming, speaking tour. While he is gone, Lee is spending a lot of time going to his home, making plans, figuring out routes of escape, where to hide the gun after it's all over. He decides to buy a rifle. Things completely changed for the better. They actually somewhat had a little bit of a married life again. He didn't hit her anymore. Now that he's decided to wait to kill Walker, and he feels like he has a little more time to plan, he's not so upset all of the time. But sometimes he would get really snippy with her and dismissive. But it was things like, he would take June out on the deck area sometimes. If Marina went out to join them, he would look at her and say, "What are you doing out here? Don't you have anything to do?" Sometimes he would even get up and walk away if she intended to stay. One time he asked Marina, "Do you love me?" And she replied, "I do." He asked her why. She said, "For your beautiful legs, your bottom, and your ugly disposition." And she said he actually took off his pants to look at his legs. "Do I really have nice legs?" And she said, "You do." So sometimes he would just sit there with his pants off, extend his legs out, or drape his leg over one arm of the sofa as kind of a way of asking her, come and give me a kiss, or, we've had a fight, why don't we make up? Marina was pregnant. Lee was really hoping for a boy this time. Sometimes she would find him lying in bed, just staring at the ceiling, and she knew he was thinking about the new baby. He was very curious about what symptoms she was having, and they were different from her first pregnancy, and this made him very happy because he said, "Oh, this time it's sure to be a boy. Our David is going to be president." Marina kind of wanted a boy too, which Lee was very happy about. She didn't care if their child was president or not. She responded to him, "You can hardly support a family, much less give our son the education he needs to be president. A president has to go to college." He replied, "Not all presidents have been to college." He's actually right on that, but there's only ever been one president that never went to college, and that was Harry Truman. Walker left Dallas on February 28th. 2 days later, on March 1st, they moved in to Neely Street. They started fixing it up. Oswald made window boxes for flowers for the patio. He set up his little office. He put a little table in there, a chair, made some shelving, and he told Marina, "Don't you ever come in here. This is my room. If you come in here and I find that you've moved something, I will beat you." She complied. She never went in there. Lee's political ideology had changed since he went to the Soviet Union. He absolutely hated the Russian communist system after having lived there. But he also absolutely hated the pure capitalist system of the United States. He had come to believe that the only system that would work would be something that takes the good parts of both systems. So in seeking the ideal system, he had decided that Castro's Cuba and the revolution that was going on there must be the good system he was looking for. And he got very into Castro. And that's one thing he had against Kennedy, was the handling of the Bay of Pigs. The month of March, we know a few things about his movements. The first week was fairly normal. It was probably a lot of just fixing up the apartment. He went to work like normal. On the 10th, he got on the bus and he went to Walker's house, and this is probably when he took a bunch of his photographs. Only 5 survived today. There were probably far more. He developed them on the 11th at work. The 11th is also the day the letter he had written to the militant was published. The title of it was News and Views from Dallas. It was signed by L.H. This issue of the Militant is what he is holding in that photograph On March 12th, Oswald ordered the rifle. He clipped a coupon from American Rifleman magazine, went to the post office, and ordered an Italian carbine called the Mannlicher Carcano. He ordered it from Klein's Sporting Goods Company. He sent a money order for $21.45. $12.78 was for the rifle, $7.17 was for the scope, and $1.50 for postage and handling. Lee was obviously very anxious to receive this rifle. The week after that, he signed out of work early to probably go to the post office to check every single day to see if it had arrived. As a great coincidence, on March 20th, the handgun he had ordered and the rifle shipped on the same day and arrived on March 25th. Marina first saw the rifle later that week. She saw it propped up in his little office. He tried to disguise it by hanging a jacket over it, but she could tell what it was. Through February and March, he hardly ate a thing. He lost a tremendous amount of weight from being upset, tense, and worried. In March, it seemed like he didn't allow time for it. His days would be leaving very early in the morning. Then he would return for supper, go into his little closet, and work out his plan. He had this little blue loose leaf folder that George Bohe had given him months before, and he made this his little scrapbook of his plot to assassinate Walker. He filled it with the historical rationale for what he was doing. It was like going back in time and killing Hitler before he could do all of those horrible things he did. He thought of this killing of Walker as being basically the same thing. So he was writing down, for history's sake, why he was doing what he was doing. He described his political ideology. He had a little autobiographical section about who he was and where he had been with photos of him overseas. This also contained his plan, the photographs of Walker's house, where he was going to hide the gun, how he was going to get away. He intended to get caught, and he wanted everyone to know why he was doing what he was doing. Just to give you an idea of some of the things he wrote in this, he predicted that what he called a total crisis would occur in the United States and that it would destroy the capitalist system. There has been a hypothesis, we'll never know because he was killed and we can't ask him anymore, that maybe he thought killing Kennedy would create that total crisis. It was March 31st, 1963. Their neighbors were gone. They had the yard to themselves. It was a Saturday. It was sunny. Lee came down to Marina. She was hanging up Junie's diapers on the clothesline, and he asked her to take his picture. And she said, "Why me? I've never taken a picture in my life." He said, "Don't worry about it. I'll show you how." He went back upstairs, and a few minutes later, he came out, and she burst out laughing when she saw him. He was dressed head to toe in black. He had the pistol tucked into his waist. He was holding the rifle. He had a couple of newspapers in his hand and two cameras. One was a Soviet camera, a Smena 2. The other was a dual-lens American Imperial Reflex. So even though the Russian camera could be set automatically to take the picture without anyone holding it, it didn't work in the US. He couldn't get film for it. So she had to take the picture using the other American camera. She said, "Why are you rigged out like that? And where on earth did you get those guns?" From Interest? Interest was a Soviet travel agency which aimed to impress foreigners. She actually thought he was trying to impress her. So he showed her how to use the camera. She thinks it was about 4 p.m. when this happened because she said he was worried about the shadows. She also thinks she held the camera the wrong way, at eye level instead of down at your waist like you're supposed to use it. And it was only months later that she found out that she had actually snapped 2 photos. She thought, man, if this is his idea of a good time, then I hope he enjoys it, as long as he leaves me alone. She asked him why he wanted the guns in the picture, and he told her that he was going to send the pictures to the militant so that they would know he was, quote, ready for anything. The issues he was holding, he had the March 24th issue of The Worker and the March 11th issue of The Militant, in which his letter had been published. And the 24th issue was just the most recent. She told him, "What a weird one you are. Who on earth needs a photograph like that? He probably developed them at work the next day on April 1st. He came home and he gave one to Marina and told her to keep it for the baby. On the back he had written, "For Junie from Papa." And Marina said, "Good God, why would Junie want a picture with guns?" And he told her to remember Papa by sometime. It seems on the same day that he developed the backyard photos, Lee also lost his job. While he was a very fast worker and a hard worker, he was making a lot of mistakes, and a lot of his work had to be redone. With all of the turmoil going on in his life, being upset about Walker, overextending himself, working lots of overtime, taking a typing class at night, spying on Walker, constantly checking the post office box, he couldn't get along with his coworkers. They were always working in really close confines. And if he needed through, he would just bust into people. They were doing something that took precision. He didn't care. He just walked right through them. Or he would refuse to give way if someone needed past him. The guys had taken to they didn't like him. He also would sit around reading Russian literature, which would upset some people. So finally his boss decided he's just not a right fit for here. He just kind of pulled him aside to a quiet corner because he didn't have an office. And he told Lee, "I'm really sorry, but I just don't think you're a right fit." And he said the whole time Lee just looked at the floor. He took it very well. When it was all said and done, he just said, "Thank you." That day, as he signed out, he wrote down a forwarding address for his final paychecks. He did finish out the week. He worked through April 6th. He did not tell Marina that he had lost his job. The interesting thing is, his getting fired pretty much lines up with Walker returning to Dallas. Lee had these new weapons, but he hadn't had a chance to try them out. He got on the bus at 6th Street and Beckley. He rode the bus for 1.5 miles to the intersection of West Commerce and Beckley. Then he got off. He walked down to the levee to the Trinity River bottom, and he spent the evening there practicing. Looking at a map, looks like it's just a little ways upriver from where I was showing you where the Barrows lived in that tent city. As he was practicing, he was trying to get the feel of the trigger action. This would have been new to him. It was also more powerful than he had used. He learned to work the bolt without disturbing the alignment of the barrel, which could throw off your aim. He had to adjust the sight. According to most experts, it's pretty easy to learn to use a telescopic sight. General Walker himself said it's very easy and a skill that really increases accuracy. Taking into account OSWALD'S skills based on his scores in the military, he should be able to, quote, be capable of sighting that rifle in well, firing it with only 10 rounds of practice. He loved hunting. He did small game hunting with his brothers when he was young. And of course, the additional training in the Marine Corps. So he knew how to sight, aim, and fire up to 500 yards away. And that's what that Marine said, that he was good even that far. And he said that is a really, really long ways away. So the expertise, it goes from marksman at the bottom to sharpshooter to expert. He scored a 212, which is 2 points above the minimum for sharpshooter. I guess a few years later, no one really knows the conditions in which the test was done, weather, light, quality of the rifle, ammunition. He got a 191, which put him in as a marksman. But by civilian standards, he was considered a good to excellent shot, and he also has the use of this telescopic sight, which he would not have had when taking those tests. 2 days after that practice session, on Friday, April 5th, he signed out of work at 5:05, arrived home, and caught Marina taking the baby for a walk. And he said, "Hold up, I want to go with you. Go on ahead, I'll catch up." So Marina pushed the baby really slowly so that he could catch up with them. By 2 blocks and he was moving really rapidly, even more than usual, and she noticed that he had his rifle with him. He had it covered in his green Marine Corps raincoat, and she asked him, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Target practice." And he said, "Walk with me to the bus stop." Well, this made her mad, because she thought he was going to come on a walk with them, and he did this all the time. "I'm going to promise you something, and then I'm going to yank it out from under you and not actually do it." So when they saw the bus stop, she got mad at him and she started saying things like, instead of coming with us, you go someplace to shoot. And he said, well, it's none of your business. I'm going anyway. He saw the bus coming and he sprinted for it. And she yelled after him, don't bother to come home at all. I won't be waiting for you. I hope the police catch you. As the bus went by, she saw the sign on front said Love Field. He wouldn't go to a rifle range. And there's no evidence he ever went to a rifle range after getting back from Russia, ever. He returned home around 9 o'clock, and she told him, you better watch out for the police. And he assured her that where he had been, there was no one around to hear him. That week, Marina reports that Lee cleaned his rifle at least 3 to 5 times. The first time was March 31st, the day of the backyard photo. She said he cleaned it on the sofa. So it could be that April 3rd and April 5th are the only times he practiced with the rifle. It's possible he did on Sunday, April 7th. After that, the rifle was not in the house. He had gone to his hiding spot he had picked out about a half a mile from the general's house, and he buried the rifle near the site of where he was going to make the attempt. Marina absolutely hated and detested the rifle. She was terrified it might go off. She always cleaned in a careful circle all the way around it so that she never had to get near it or touch it. And she didn't ask any questions. He told her he was going to go hunting, so it made sense that he would maybe want to practice before going hunting. Sometime that week, George's wife, Jeanne de Morenshield, came to visit. It was her first time coming to see Marina at the Neely Street apartment. George was out of town. He had gone to New York. She had quit her job because they were getting ready to move away from Dallas. She noticed the rifle. This is the 4th or the 5th, so it's still in the house. It's in a closet, and she sees it, and Marina sees that she's seen it, and she said, look at that. We have barely enough to eat, and my crazy husband goes and buys a rifle. She told her that Lee had been practicing with it. Now, Jeanne knew a few things about guns. Her father had been a gun collector, and she instantly noticed the fact that this rifle had a scope on it. And that meant something to Jeanne. It didn't mean anything to Marina. Marina didn't know what that was or what that meant. She didn't say anything to Marina about it. She just kind of filed it away to tell George when he got home. Hey, look, George, Oswald's got a rifle. It has a telescopic sight on it, and he's been practicing with it. Also this week, Oswald starts talking in his sleep again. A lot. He hasn't done this for weeks. He's getting closer to doing the deed, and he's really stressed out about it. She is having to wake him up twice a night sometimes. Saturday, April 6th is his last day at work. He gets off at 5:30. He comes back home. She still doesn't know he's been fired. Sunday, on the 7th, he left with the rifle. He stayed out all day long. He came home for supper at 6, and the rifle was no longer with him. That is when he hid it down by the railroad tracks about a half a mile away from Walker's house. He left again after supper, and she doesn't remember when he came home. Walker is due back early the next week. Probably on Sunday, Lee was watching the house at 4011 Turtle Creek Boulevard. Monday, April the 8th, it's his first day out of work, but he leaves as if he has work so that Marina won't know. He was out all day. The only thing that is for sure known that he did that day is he went to the Texas Employment Commission, told them he was out of work, but they didn't have any leads for him at that time. Maybe he went and watched Walker's house. It would make sense that he would because that's the day Walker got back. Walker says he got back either late afternoon or evening. He had supper at 6, then he went out again. He bought a newspaper. He got on the bus. He was going to do it. While he was on the bus, he's reading the newspaper, and he sees that the Church of Latter-day Saints at 4027 Turtle Creek Boulevard, which is behind the general's house, is having a service Wednesday night that would get out around 9 o'clock. Lee sees this, and he thought, oh, there'll be people and cars that Wednesday night, and that will give me a better chance of getting away. He can blend into that crowd. So he gets off the bus, and he goes back home and decides to wait until Wednesday night to actually do the attack. On Tuesday night, the 9th, he was actually really sweet with Marina. He walked down the street, he bought a newspaper and a bottle of Dr. Pepper. He came back and sat on the balcony, and he turned to her, and he said, come sit with me. and he just kind of had a conversation with her. Have you heard from your girlfriends in Russia? Have you seen anything special or interesting in Soviet Belarusia or Crocodile, the two papers that they read? He drank a sip or two of his Dr. Pepper, and then he offered it to her and told her to finish it. And the next morning, April 10th, he told her that he had lost his job. He had tears in his eyes when he told her that the job was gone. He said, I don't know why. I tried. I liked that work so much. But probably the FBI came and asked about me, and the boss just didn't want to keep someone the FBI was interested in. When will they leave me alone? Now, there's no evidence the FBI had anything to do with him losing his job, but it is true that that job is probably the only job he ever had that he really liked. When he went out that day, she assumed he was going to look for work. He was dressed in his good gray suit, and he had on a clean white shirt. He didn't come home for supper. She waited until about 7, then cooked something for herself. Between 8 and 9, she put June to bed, and then she started to get nervous. She didn't have any resources to find out where he might be. She didn't have a neighbor with a phone. He didn't have a job that she could check with to see if he was there. All she could do was wait and try not to think too much. At 10 o'clock, she opened the door to his little closet, and on his desk there was a key lying on top of a piece of paper. She picked it up and she started to read. It said, "Here's the key to the post office box, which is located in the main post office downtown on Hervey Street. I paid for the mailbox last month, so you needn't worry about it. Send information about what has happened to me to the embassy," the Soviet embassy. "And also send newspaper clippings if there's anything about me in the papers. I think the embassy will come quickly to your aid once they know everything. I paid our rent on the 2nd, so don't worry about it. I have also paid for the water and gas. There may be some money from work. They will send it to our post office box. Go to the bank and they will cash it. You can either throw out my clothing or give it away. Do not keep it. As for my personal papers, both military papers and papers from the factory, I prefer that you keep them. Certain of my papers are in the small blue suitcase. My address book is on the table, in my study if you need it. We have friends here, and the Red Cross will also help you. I left you as much money as I could, $60 on the 2nd of the month, and you and Junie can live for 2 months on $10 a week. If I am alive and taken prisoner, the city jail is at the end of the bridge we always used to cross when we went to town." Even as she's staring at this letter, taking it all in, trying to figure out what in the world does this mean, she recognizes the words prisoner and jail, and she starts to shake. Lee comes home around 11:30. He is white. He is drenched in sweat. And she asks him, "What happened?" And he said, "I shot Walker." She said he was so out of breath he could hardly get the words out. "Did you kill him?" she asked. "I don't know." "My God," she said, "the police will be here any minute. What did you do with the rifle?" "I buried it." All she had in her head was police dogs. They're going to smell this rifle, and they are going to come here. "Don't ask any questions," he said. He turned on the radio. There was no news. He turned to her and he said, "And for God's sake, don't bother me." He took off his clothes and he fell face down on the bed, spread-eagled on his stomach, and went to sleep right away. And he slept all night long. Well, she couldn't sleep. She was sitting up waiting for the sound of police dogs to come to their door. What's going through her mind is, do I let the police know? In Russia, she would have been required by law to inform on him, which meant for most Russians, you never, ever, ever informed, or it would destroy your relationship. She didn't know that in the U.S. it was the exact opposite. She could never be forced to testify against her husband. And so she makes a conscious decision, I'm not going to inform on my husband. And later this would cause some guilt, because a lot of people would tell her, if only you had done something after Walker, maybe this other thing wouldn't have happened. And that's one thing that makes me wonder if that's why, since all of this information I'm sharing with you from her that was gathered in 1964, that she has actually changed her mind. And that could very well be a coping mechanism. Well, if I believe he didn't do it, number one, it's comforting to decide to believe he didn't do it. And number two, then I don't have to feel any guilt about what I may or may not have done having an impact. The next morning, Marina woke up. She had a headache. Lee was in the living room listening to the radio. He looked up at her disappointed and said, "I missed." They don't say much, just that somebody unidentified took a shot at Walker. She was so relieved. He went out and bought a paper, and he came back in and said, "Oh, hell. Walker moved his head at the last minute. That's the only thing that saved him. My aim was perfect. It was only accident that I missed." And she starts asking questions about what happened. Why did you want to kill Walker? And who is Walker? He just told her that Walker was a fascist, a former general, and that he was a leader of a fascist organization. She said, "I don't care who he is. He didn't deserve to be killed. Maybe he had a wife and kids." And he said, he lives alone. And he also told her, if someone had killed Hitler in time, many lives would have been saved. She didn't really know what to say to that. She did know about Hitler and about his atrocities. He went on and told her that General Walker had been sitting at his desk at the back of his house by a window. He aimed, he only fired once, and he did not stay long enough to see if he had hit him. The church was getting out, and he needed to go blend in with that crowd. Nobody really knows if he took one bus or two. It's possible he actually took the rifle onto a bus, rode to a point, got off, walked to his hiding spot, and then took a second bus home. It's really not known for sure if that's what he did. On Thursday, April 11th, the Walker attempt was front page news, and they had so much wrong. It actually delighted Oswald. He started to laugh. They identified the bullet as a .30-06, which was totally wrong. They had the bullet wrong. They had the gun wrong. They also reported that two men in a late model unlicensed car had been seen in an alley of Walker's house on the night of his return. A 14-year-old boy who was a neighbor claimed to have seen two cars, one with one man in it, the other having several, speed away from the scene. Lee just roared. He's like, Americans are so spoiled. It never occurs to them that you might use your own two legs. They always think you have to have a car. They chased a car, and here I am sitting here. Before any car left the scene, my legs had carried me a long way away. But as much as he thought the police were idiots for thinking all of these wrong things, he was very disappointed in himself. He kept saying, how on earth did I miss? A single second saved him. I fired and he moved. Marina saw him thumbing through the blue notebook, and she asked what it was, and he said, "It's my plan." She asked if she could see it. He was on the sofa. He had it in his lap. She stood facing him across the coffee table, and she said, "May I see?" He gave it to her. She saw photos of Walker's house from various angles. There were lots of lined sheets covered with handwriting, all of which was in English. "I had it so well figured out," he said. "I couldn't make a mistake. It was only an accident that I missed." "And what do you mean to do with this book?" she asked. "I'm going to save it as a keepsake. I'll hide it somewhere." She said, "A keepsake? This is evidence. For God's sake, Alka, destroy it." And he listened to her. He went to the bathroom. He stood over the toilet, and he began burning and dropping the pages in there. But he kept a good bit of it. He kept that part about his justification for his actions and for his political beliefs. He started to have anxiety attacks in his sleep. He would shake all over from head to toe. It would seem to happen to him about every half hour. He would just shake from head to toe. And he wouldn't wake up. He did go and file his unemployment claim. Marina just tried to keep busy with her chores. She's still listening for the sound of police dogs coming to take them away. As she started to beg Lee, "Don't you ever, ever, ever do that again." She said, "The fact that he moved at the last minute is a sign from God. He is not supposed to die, so just let this go." He promised her, but she said, "Look," and she pointed to the rifle, "that's no way to prove your ideas. If someone doesn't like what you think, does that mean he has a right to shoot you? Once people start doing that, no one will dare go out of doors. In Russia, you used to say that there was freedom of speech in America, that everyone can say what he pleases. Okay, go to meetings. Say what you want to say there. Or are you afraid you have so little brains you can't make anybody listen? And even if you didn't think of me, she said, you ought to have thought about Junie. I did, he said coldly. I left you enough money for a while. Besides, the Russians here like you. They'd have helped. On Saturday, Easter Eve, someone knocked on the door. It was George de Mohrenschildt. Marina was just so relieved that it wasn't the police and dogs that she went down and she let them in. Jean came in first. She was dressed up really nice. She had a little pink rabbit to give to June. George came on in, and the first words he said was, "Hey, Lee, how come you missed?" And they just stand there dumbfounded and looked at each other in horror like, "Did you tell him? Did you tell him?" Saying that with their eyes. He came up to the landing and he goes, "Shh, shh, Junie's sleeping." "You always forget the baby," Jean says to her husband. "Let's go out on the balcony." As they're going outside, Lee's going and he's getting chairs and he's moving them outside for everybody to sit. And all George can talk about is the attempt on Walker's life. He seems to have read everything there is to read about it in the newspapers. Marina gets the impression that George knows so much that surely Lee told him. For his part, Lee didn't say much as all of this conversation is going on. And finally he said, "Oh, yes, wouldn't it be fascinating to know who did it and why and how?" George said that he thought Lee looked shriveled, was tense, and had a peculiar look on his face. Marina thought he handled the situation pretty well, given the circumstances. George and Jean were both in a great mood. He had just got back from New York. He had gotten a new job in Haiti, prospecting for oil. They were getting ready to move. Things were going well for them. But Marina is just sitting there shocked. She doesn't follow the conversation very well. She was terrified. She was just kind of trapped in her mind, trying to process all of this. Around 10 o'clock, she went into the backyard, picked some roses for Jean, and as soon as they were out the door, Lee turned to her and he said, Did you tell them?" "Of course not," she said. "I thought you did." "You're out of your mind," he said. "But isn't it amazing how he guessed? It's a lucky thing he couldn't see my face. I was hardly able to speak. Maybe he was only kidding. But man, he sure hit the nail on the head." Well, he believed her, and she believed him, and I think it was the fact that Jean had seen that gun. They knew he had it, and that it had a scope on it, and they just put two and two together. George pretty much verifies this. He denied influencing Lee to try to kill Walker. He said, quote, "I didn't want him to shoot Walker. I didn't want him to shoot anybody. But if somebody has a gun with a telescopic lens, you see, and knowing that he hates the man, it is a logical assumption." And that's the last time Lee and George would ever see each other. By April 19th, the de Mohrenschildts leave Dallas and move to Haiti. A lot of their belongings would end up in storage in Dallas. Many years later, in 1967, among all of those stored things, containing a stack of records that had once been loaned to Marina. Within that bundle, laid on top, was a photo of Lee with his guns, one of the ones that Marina had taken. Written on the back of the photograph was, quote, "Hunter for the fascists, ha ha ha." And under that was a small sketch of a dog, like what the Mohrenschildts owned. And under that, and then in English, in Lee's handwriting, it said, "For my friend George, from Lee Oswald." And then the date, 5/4/63. These records were probably mailed to George from New Orleans. So probably on April 13th, Marina, finding the photo as a reference to his lucky guess, maybe as a warning to Lee, don't go around shooting people, or someone's going to find out. She just took the photo, wrote the little joke on it, "Hunter for the fascists," and ha ha ha. She was warning Lee and mocking him. Thank you for joining me today. We will continue this story next time. We are going to be talking about Ruth Payne and her friendship with Marina and their move to New Orleans to let the heat from the whole Walker affair start to calm down a little bit. I will see you all next time.